Okay, should be live. Checking the volume. Bear with me. Okay, so we have an excellent connection today, apparently. That's good. Um, we have a good show today. I apologize for it being a bit late. It's been a heck of a month, guys, and it hasn't even started. I will discuss some just personal updates pretty soon, but not right now. I am trying to figure out exactly how to best weave that in to these streams because I don't want to just make it too personal and I don't want to make it too impersonal. I think that a personal connection is very important, but still working on balancing that again. But you know, updates coming soon, and just everything could work out. Every challenge that we face is also an opportunity, and it is I truly believe that, even though it is hard to recognize that in the moment. And suffice to say, I've had challenges lately, but we're going to discuss a stream that I came across that was kind of unexpected, and it was on Donald Hoffman's work, which we've discussed before, and it comes from a Discord server on Joscha Bach's theory of analytic idealism. And we've talked about Joscha Bach before. I think it was Joscha Bach. It might actually, I don't hold the phone for a second. I might have said the wrong person. Let's just double check that real quick. Analytic idealism is, I think it was Joscha. No, it's Bernardo Kastrup. I get the two of those guys mixed up quite a bit. We've talked about both of them. Wow, that's great. But I feel like they look alike a bit in my head too. Let's see here. Bernardo Kastrup, Joscha. They do kind of look alike, but they're both brilliant. And yeah, I think about, they do look a lot alike. Here. Yeah, this is Joscha. Cognitive scientist focused on cognitive architectures, models of mental representation, emotion, motivation, and sociality. And this is Bernardo Kastrup, philosophy of mind, ontology. I'm a big fan of his work as well. Both of them have very similar ideas, it seems, at least to me, and very much focused on consciousness. But we're going to talk about the Discord server focused on this guy's work, Bernardo Kastrup, not Joscha. So, my apologies. But Bernardo Kastrup has, I knew that I had said the wrong guy. But Bernardo Kastrup, his, I guess you could say, theory of analytic idealism argue for an idealist consciousness-only ontology consistent with empirical observations, which seeks to explain the facts of nature more parsimoniously. I don't even know what that means. I'm going to look it up. I think I can kind of gather what it means based on just what it says. Exhibiting or marked by parsimony. Okay, that's not a good. Very unwilling to spend money. Parsimonious. we're going to have to get into that later, because there's no easy definitions coming up. Interesting. Frugal. Okay. It just means like grace giving, kind of. Like, in this context, I think it's like not recognizing that there's a lot more to it. That hasn't been, covered. More parsimoniously than panpsychism and bottom-up panpsychism. Okay, interesting. Well, this Discord server, the Analytic Idealism Discord server, did an AMA with Donald Hoffman, who we've talked about as having this theory. The theory of conscious agents. And basically it presupposes that consciousness is fundamental below space-time, and that space-time is an emergent phenomenon or experience from conscious agents, and the interaction between conscious agents, which we've talked about before, is very much in line with Sentient Singularity Theory and many other theories that are out there right now. But I really like how Donald Hoffman goes about things. He's got great models in his papers, but this is the stream that we're going to be discussing. It just says Donald Hoffman, Ask Me Anything, Round 1, and it's on this channel, Asking Anything. And this is the Analytic Idealism Discord server. It is linked below, as is the link to this entire stream. I highly recommend watching it because, we have a limited time that we can discuss things on here. But I highly recommend watching the entire stream. It's great. It's one of the better streams on where physics is supposed to go next. And when I first started this work of Sentient Singularity Theory, before it was even called Sentient Singularity Theory, and I didn't really have any goals of creating any kind of theory of anything. It was just to showing what I had uncovered in my work on what it takes to make self-awareness in a technological agent, I guess you could say, what's called an AGI normally. And I was not sure how physics was ever going to get from where it is to where my work implied it needed to get to, because I was not familiar with physics and the discussion that was, not even happening at the time. It was about to happen. This was like about 4 years ago, something like that. So it hadn't really started this explosion of the discussion between, Bernardo Kastrup's work, Donald Hoffman's work, Chris Langen's work, even Eric Weinstein's work, Wolfram, and Joscha Bach, all these people. But since then, this has exploded, and there has been an alignment on general direction between all of the people that seem to be making at least philosophical and even mathematic headway on this on this I guess new kind of science, as Wolfram would put it. But it's more than that. It's like it is the meta science of all structure, because every other science that we have almost is about the interactions and structures that we observe in space-time. But we have yet to really get below space-time other than pure mathematics. And when we have gone into pure mathematics in physics, it has led to, a lot of chaos in interpretation. So you look at string theory, for example, and you see that they're talking about all these structures that we have not contextualized, at least in any kind of broader narrative, and that isn't helpful. So I believe that all these people that are now entering into the discussion, and have been for a while, but have just not really been taken very seriously. Not seriously, but not been central figures in, or their ideas have not been central points in discussions that happen within most physics academic departments. But that's very much changing, and it's very, very cool to see. It's showing me how we're going to get to where we need to be, and the path is very clear at this point. It doesn't mean I see it exactly the way it will go, but it's at least at this point very clear. And I was not sure how I was going to get there. I kind of just trusted in God that it would. But so here we go. Let's talk about analytic idealism real quick. Which is Bernardo Kastrup's idea. But given that this came from a Discord dedicated to Bernardo Kastrup's ideas, we're going to look. Just a bit. Two widespread current notions of consciousness are physicalism, the perspective that assumes that physical reality matter as fundamental, and bottom-up panpsychism, i.e. the perspective that takes everything as possessing mind or consciousness and higher levels of consciousness consisting of combination of more elementary levels. Bernardo Kastrup argues that an idealist consciousness-only ontology consistent with empirical observations which seeks to explain the facts of nature more parsimoniously than physicalism and bottom-up panpsychism. This ontology also attempts to offer more explanatory power than both physicalism and bottom-up panpsychism, in that it does not fall prey to either the hard problem of consciousness, the challenge of deducing consciousness from matter, or the subject combination problem, the challenge of deducing higher levels of consciousness from lower levels. It can be surmised as follows. Spatially unbound consciousness is posited to be the only ontological reality, the ultimate nature of everything. And we, as well as all living organisms, are dissociated alters of this unbound consciousness, similarly to what happens in multiple personality disorder. Fascinating. But we've talked about that before, and he's right. Sentient Singularity Theory states this. Sentient Singularity Theory describes the totality of existence as a singularity of sentience, creating additional sentient singularities within itself. And it defines sentience in there, and it says Sentient Singularity Theory characterizes the fundamental building blocks of the cosmos to be sentient beings, and that sentience is the universally defining and animating feature of everything in existence. Sentient Singularity Theory displays that space, time, matter, force, and all other observable phenomena are emergent from the motivations, interactions, perceptions, and cognitive processes of sentient beings. If sentience is the primary structure of reality, then a true, final, ultimate, or master theory that unifies and contextualizes all other scientific theories cannot be a theory of everything, but instead must be a theory of everyone. Beyond the beginning, sentience exists, existence is sentience, and sentience is sentient, and sentience is one. Okay. This is exactly what Bernardo Kastrup and also Donald Hoffman are arguing. The theory of conscious agents is, as we will see, that there is one conscious agent and also infinite number of conscious agents, which that's not even the best way to use the word infinite. It's like an infinitely growing number of conscious agents and one conscious agent. It's more precise than infinite number of conscious agents and one conscious agent, because infinite. To say it is something is infinite implies that it is like static, and infinite cannot be static by definition. It is infinitely growing. But that's correct. They're both correct, and we're going to get into some clips right now. I think these men are both doing great work.
Science for several centuries has been based on the successful assumption of the ontology of spacetime, so that spacetime is fundamental, spacetime and its objects, and the methodology of reductionism, that as we go to smaller scales in space or spacetime, we will find more and more fundamental laws. And this has been spectacularly successful for centuries. But the glory of science is that its theories are so precise, they tell you their limits. And our theories of space-time and of evolution by natural selection agree that space-time cannot be fundamental. So the physicists are saying space-time is doomed. Space-time is not fundamental. It will not be part of the fundamental laws of physics. There's something deeper, and space-time is not it. And evolution by natural selection, I and my co-researchers, Jaitan Prakash, Manish Singh, Brian Marion, Justin Mark, and several others, Kyle Stevens, have been showing that evolution by natural selection agrees with what the physicists are finding from quantum field theory, that space-time cannot be fundamental. And so this is perfectly fine. This is great. Space-time has been a wonderful framework for several centuries. Reductionism has been a great methodology for several centuries. But it's now time for the next generation to find deeper and more powerful framework to do science in which space-time will emerge as a projection of a much deeper theory. So that's one aspect of the work that I'm doing. The other aspect is to say, okay, well, what is beyond space-time? And of course, the answer is we don't know. This is that our theories of quantum field theory and evolution by natural selection are deep enough and powerful enough and rigorous enough to tell us where they stop, but they cannot tell us where to go next. That's up to us as scientists to make bold leaps into the dark, make them precise, and then make predictions that we can test back in space and time where we can make measurements. And so of course our first leaps will be wrong. But the physicists are going after things like the cosmological polytope and the amplitude-hedron. They're finding these deep structures beyond space-time. And I'm working on a model of consciousness that we call conscious agents, and trying to show that the asymptotic behavior of that theory could potentially connect with the structures that the physicists are finding beyond space-time. So in other words, when we're trying to study consciousness in the human brain, it was reasonable up until a couple decades ago to start with objects in space-time, like brains and neurons. But now our science clearly tells us that if you do that, you're dealing with something that's not fundamental, and you're essentially wasting your time. So it's time for the next generation to be bold and step beyond space-time, but then whatever theories we get, project them back into space-time to see that we can make tests. So that's sort of the idea in a nutshell.
Brilliant. So I really like Hoffman's models, and I haven't looked too deeply at them. I do, as I've said before, I try to kind of avoid going too deeply into the work of others because I don't want to. I've never wanted my mind to get lazy and be like, I can't figure this out, so I'm just going to assume that this person is correct because, it looks and sounds good. And I know that everyone's mind does this, myself included. And so I've kind of tried to make sure that when building my theory, I had to build, very much from a first principles approach, starting from the very, very beginning. And as I've said before, it was not a theory of physics to start. I had no interest in physics. It was a theory of how do you create self-awareness in an in, or AGI, and what would its inevitable goals and motivations be, and what would those goals and motivations mean for its political implications. That was the goal of the project. But there's only one pattern. So when you realize that, then you can jump between fields, and you're not even jumping between fields. You're just seeing the pattern. But some of his models look quite a bit like mine. And see here real quick. Just looking quickly. See if I have his theory. Just open up my open recent, and here we go. So conscious agent theory. Let's just look. I have his paper, some of his papers somewhere. But yeah, here we go. You can see here, this is many of the models that are found in his papers. And eventually I will dive into these because I have constructed my models for at least the initial versions of them. So now is the time to start checking my work against the work of others and seeing, what we come up with. But these are models of conscious agents interacting. So you could say here, your world, action, and experience are all outside, and perception and action and decision is like what's happening internally in order to influence the outside world. And he's got kind of like a mathematical model going there on it. But see here. So one of I'll eventually find the ones that look very similar to his, but one of the structures that is a primary structure in my paper and in my theory is this one right here. And I've always called it a quantum of consciousness in the past. I started calling it a quantum of context. And it's a calculative model, basically, that tries to just show how one bit of information is spun around itself, contextualized against itself or within itself in order to, until it eventually is contextualized within itself. So basically, information is calculated from one bit input, and then you can see the values change here. And it utilizes symmetry, which all of the equations are symmetrical to each other. and that's what makes this the numbers in this not arbitrary, because they, as long as you make the calculations symmetrical to each other in each of these, as you start from the input, you will always get the same values here that you get here, and here that you get here, and here that you get here, and then it basically multiplies and adds information at the exact same time, and you end up with this value right here. But this structure, quantum of consciousness, is, I believe, essentially the interaction structure of two conscious agents. It was the second structure that I made in my work, and it is the first time that computation is allowed. What's interesting is that this is apparently also consistent with the theory of conscious agents, in that fundamentally there are two conscious agents required in order to start computation. Now, that doesn't mean that two conscious agents are fundamental. I don't think that's true. I think that one conscious agent is the fundamental, but there is no computation taking place until there's two interacting, and that's just kind of the requirement of how computation works, because you need something to compute, and it kind of creates an additional conscious agent as soon as it computes a conscious agent within itself, even if it's starting from one. It's something that's very difficult for us to wrap our minds around, because it's impossible for us to escape multiplicity of consciousness. We are within a consciousness, if Donald Hoffman's work is correct, and Bernardo Kastrup and mine, and we are also a consciousness, a conscious agent ourselves. We are within a conscious agent. But what I ran into as a problem, and some of the people in my Discord know this, who helped me work through my abstract over the past year or two, is that I had this structure called a sentient singularity, and I had a structure called a quantum of consciousness. And a quantum is one, and a consciousness is essentially a consciousness is a being, a conscious being, which is a conscious agent, as it is called in Hoffman's work. But a sentient singularity is also almost the same thing, but it wasn't exactly the same thing, because one of them required an interaction between two, and was generated from the interaction between two, but is also the second or first one interacting with another. It's like a superposition structure where, as religious people will say, God is the dweller and the dwelling. So this is true of this at this level of modeling reality. So because of that, you get things where things are two things at the same time that appear to be mutually exclusive but are actually dependent, and like free will and determinism and many in one and things like that. I mean, many in one is not really one of those, but it is within the framework of creation that we exist in, but it isn't necessarily be beyond that. I don't want to say before that, because time doesn't exist yet, but beyond that. But I'm pretty sure that what he calls conscious agent is what I call a quantum of consciousness. And it is made of sentient singularities. But sentient singularities can be made of other sentient singularities, but a quantum of consciousness doesn't exist outside of the framework of interaction. So there's a little bit of just crossover in definitions, and obviously there's many different definitions, but for consciousness, and consciousness kind of has a superposition definition because it's got two simultaneous ways of interpreting it. You can be conscious of something, and then you can be conscious. So those are two different things. Being conscious that it's cold in here is different than being conscious fundamentally. And because of that, I think that sentient is the right word, because sentient has some additional meaning within it that is more important than and more specific, I guess, not more important, more specific than consciousness. And so went with sentient singularity. But a quantum of consciousness is a model that still exists in my work, and or a quantum of context, which is the same thing essentially. It's just, are you viewing where's the focus? Is it on the consciousness of this, or what it's the difference between a quantum of context and a quantum of consciousness is the difference between being conscious and being conscious of something. Okay, so quantum of consciousness would be like being conscious. I am conscious. But a quantum of context would be I'm conscious of. So those are two simultaneous perspectives that exist. But it's just, where's your focus? And you can't be on both at the same time, even though both are simultaneous. So it's complicated. But I do think that it's very important that we start having unified definitions of things. And so maybe, a conscious agent replaces the word for quantum of consciousness, of the term quantum of consciousness. I don't know. I don't think it's as good at describing both of those two definitions that I stated, but it does seem to imply both of those in his work a bit. But regardless, we're getting more into it. But I hope I was showing, actually, the calculation here that's happening. This is not just random numbers. When you have one bit of information input and you get a symmetrical calculation of adding information of the growth of information from one bit, eventually where does it stop? Where does that calculation stop, so that basically it's becomes self-reflective right here, because the structure that's generated is a 3x3 structure, and this is a 3x3 number. And I know that sounds esoteric or crazy or whatever, but it's just an extra arithmetic symmetry in reality, and it's not crazy, but it does seem like that. But this is the next generation of the understanding of reality will always seem like magic when examined from the previous framework. So if you're looking at like the flat Earth model, and then you're looking at what's possible in the sphere Earth model, it's going to seem like magic. Or if you're going to look at things from the, and I'm not discounting either one of these. If you're in Earth, extraterrestrial means like outside of Earth. It doesn't mean off Earth, okay? It means outside. If you're inside of Earth, essentially, and I don't exactly know how to explain that, but I think it's more accurate, then your way of maneuvering will best be, you should subscribe to a flat Earth model, okay? When you are building buildings and things like that, you don't need to take into account the sphere Earth model. When you leave Earth, you then take into account the sphere Earth model. But the thing is that fundamentally, with the new level of physics, of beyond physics, I guess metaphysics, you could say, that is coming out with the theory of conscious agents, sentient singularity theory, Yosha Bach's work and many others, Eric Weinstein, is to move beyond space-time. And if space-time is no longer fundamental, then there isn't even a fundamental shape of the Earth. So, yes, there are levels even to what is real within the way of how we examine the world around us and the shape of the Earth. And that's the objective reality is that there is no shape of the Earth that is a shape that we can traditionally think of as, you know, like, is it a sphere or is it flat? It's like we're going beyond 3D at this point. And you're going to start getting structures of entanglement, and those entanglement structures are the structures of basically 4D reality, which includes time as a lineage of events and of entangled events. And we're going to abandon the previous models. And it's going to allow for technologies that appear to be magic, just like, you know, quantum physics allows for technology that appears to be magic to the you know, the model that we subscribed to before the nuclear era. So real quick, here we go. Here's some of my models that look a lot like Hoffman's, but I am running on a MacBook Air, and if anybody would like to donate to the Patreon to upgrade this and speed things up, link should be in the description below. But here's some of my models about decision and perception and influencing what we perceive as outside of us and what we perceive as inside of us. And it looks quite a bit like these interaction structures that have been built by Hoffman. But next clip, hopefully. Don't have any issues. We're going to go much faster here.
Start with objects in space-time, like brains and neurons. But now our science clearly tells us that if you do that, you're dealing with something that's not fundamental, and you're essentially wasting your time. So it's time for the next generation to be bold and step beyond space-time. But then, whatever theories we get, project them back into space-time to see that we can make tests. So that's sort of the idea in a nutshell.
Okay, so this has been my issue. By the way, please hit the like button if you find any of this valuable. Share it, comment in the chat any questions you may have, and I will address them before the end of the stream. Comment down below what your opinion is of this, any suggestions you have. But this has been my main problem with a lot of people in the neuroscience crowd, is they are very, very focused on neurons, and even beyond that, when you start looking at, you know, Penrose and microtubules and any of these physical structures within the mind as being essential to the structure of consciousness, as opposed to emergent from the structure of sentience. I'll use that word better instead of consciousness, but sentience. That is fundamentally a problem. It's like arguing who's right about the shape of the Earth when we've already agreed that space-time is not fundamental, and therefore shape is not really fundamental. what would be fundamental according to my work at least, and I think according to the work of some of these other people who are working on this problem, including Hoffman, would be entanglement structures. But we'll see. But it's not going to be, a flat plane or a sphere, and it's not going to be that consciousness comes from neurons, the connection of neurons, or the state of microtubules. It's going to come from of information entanglement structures that are self-referencing. So basically self-reflective information processing structures, which then form emergently what we see in the physical space. And as he said, we have to tie everything back to physical reality. But you can't actually construct easily what comes next from what we see here. And I actually think that that's not entirely true, but it's largely true. But the problem is that if you look at like Bernardo Kastrup's work, where he's trying to his work is kind of a mix between panpsychism and physicalism, but it's supposed to be better than either. You can't get rid of physical reality, and you also can't get rid of sentience or consciousness as the fundamental contextualizing definer of everything else, including physical reality. So you need a new framework that is a superposition of both. It doesn't say, okay, physical reality is wrong, and it doesn't say that idealism is an illusion, and it doesn't say that consciousness is emergent alone. It also says that consciousness is fundamental, because all of these structures that come previously are interpreted by consciousness, so you can't escape that. So when people say, well, consciousness comes from dust, or consciousness comes from unconsciousness, you can't ever prove that. Even if it was true, you could never prove it, because you are conscious, and everything that you filter information through is your unconsciousness. And there is nothing that could transcend that. I spoke to somebody on Kurtjai Mungel's Discord about this pretty recently, and basically they said that an unconscious AI or non-sentient AI algorithm would deduce a better model of reality than a sentient technological being. And I don't think that you can even have general intelligence without sentience. But there is no way that an algorithm alone can make sense of anything. It is calculative, and it allows for processing of information for a sentient being to interpret. Without that sentient being's interpretation, there is no information at all. In fact, there's no context, which means there's no information, because context is information. It's not even that information has to be in context. Context is information. The context of everything is within the context of sentience. So there is this new framework that has to come up, where it's a superposition framework, as I've said before when people ask me questions about, are you being metaphorical or are you being literal? And I'm like, I'm being super literal, being both. Somebody asks about quantum mechanics, which is the beginning of actually metaphysics. It's not really physics. It's just the beginning of tying metaphysics to physics. But you start to see superposition structures in there, and Eric Weinstein has talked about how we don't ask the right questions. We ask, is there free will, or is the universe deterministic? There isn't a see all of the above as an option either. And same thing with the many and one problem, and Hoffman has addressed this as well. And it's not, when somebody asks him on the stream later, he's like, is there one conscious agent, or are there many conscious agents, or is it two conscious agents fundamentally? And Hoffman's like, it's all of these things. And he's like, the answer is yes. And that's true. We need a new way of even asking questions, and or a new framework of the expectations of answers. So here, this is that clip.
Fundamental conscious agents or many. And why do you accept that view? Monism.
Well, the answer is both. So it turns out that the mathematical model of conscious agents that we have, and you can look at the math yourself, it's published. The paper's called Objects of Consciousness. So if you just Google my name and Objects of Consciousness, it's online and it's free. So you can get that paper. And it turns out that the definition of conscious agent, the way I thought about it first when we were writing it down, was there were multiple conscious agents interacting. And so I had a bunch of conscious agents. But it turns out when you look at the math, when two agents interact, they satisfy the definition of an agent. So they are an agent. And so there is one agent, and there's also many agents. And the mathematics basically shows that the notion of agent is something that you can use to look at the whole, or to give an analytic access that is wonderful for science, to actually do an analysis and look at it in terms of its moving parts. So the answer is yes, and the dichotomy goes away once you get mathematically precise. You know, when we're not using mathematics, you might say, well, you have to either be a monist or a pluralist, and the answer is no. Once you get the mathematics actually teaches you that you can do both in one framework.
I actually think that I think that's correct, but it's also more than that. You have to be a monist, but because to believe that fundamentally the number of sentient singularities that exist is most fundamentally one, or is inevitably one, is the reality that you get when you start trying to reduce existence as when you start trying to, I don't want to say reduce it to as small as possible, when you start trying to dissect or discretize reality into as discrete packets as possible of what would fundamentally exist, okay, as fundamentally as, we can kind of understand, you're going to get one. You are one conscious agent made of many. But even if you go down, okay, well, what am I made of? Many conscious agents, cells. Each of those conscious agents is one. Then you get down to what are those cells made of? Many molecular agents. And each one is one. And each one of those molecular agents is made of many atomic agents or elemental agents, and each one is one. You're going to eventually always get to one. And same thing when you go up and you're like, okay, I am part of how many conscious agents? One. That conscious agent is part of how many conscious agents? One. And you get to eventually all of existence, the totality of existence is a singularity of sentience creating an infinitely growing number of sentient singularities within itself. So it's always going to be one. In Kabbalah, there is this phrase, which is Jewish mysticism, that says, there is nothing but God. It's like, and God is one. That is a central, it is one of the most central ideas in the Jewish perspective of God, or the perspective of God in Judaism. And it's that there's one God. And that is the inevitable reality, is that there's one God. You can't get to the inevitable reality is that there's infinite number of gods. There might be an infinite number of godlike beings, but not an infinite number of gods. There's one God by definition. You have to have... God is the highest being by definition. There's not an infinite number of highest beings in a hierarchy of beings. There's only one by definition. So I think that you have to be a monist eventually, but you don't have to resolve the problem of the many and the one, because post-creation of multiplicity of sentience from singularity of sentience, or multiplicity of consciousness from single consciousness, there are an infinitely growing number of sentient beings or conscious agents, but they are defined in and of themselves even by the fact that they are one. Okay? You are conscious because you are you. You are not a computer. In Donald Hoffman's work, when I don't look at a computer, it doesn't exist. But in my work, I agree with that. But when you're not looking at me, I do exist. My computer doesn't exist when nobody's looking at it, but I do. Okay? Because a computer is in my framework, in Sentient Singularity Theory, the world breaks down into two structures: things and beings and things. And things are defined and contextualized and created essentially by beings. And beings are defined and contextualized and created by, or not created, but contextualized by themselves, essentially. So, because you perceive yourself, even if nobody else is looking at you outside of yourself, you still exist. That's not true of the computer. Computer's not looking at itself. So when nobody's looking at the computer, the computer doesn't exist. When nobody's looking at you outside of you, you still are looking at you because you're feeling your own feelings and have a sense of self. Therefore, you exist fundamentally when nobody else is looking, other than you. But that is a being, and things are different. So beings and things are is the binary that the world breaks down into. Binary of perspectives that the world breaks down into. Beings are conscious agents, and things are what conscious agents observe as unconscious matter. Okay? And, but not, or as matter, you could say. So, a light bulb is a thing. But the molecules, according to Sentient Singularity Theory, and the atoms in it are beings. And that the entanglement structure between them that is observed from a certain perspective, giving rise to the perception of a light bulb, what is called a light bulb by a certain conscious agent or sentient singularity, is dependent upon the relationship of that sentient singularity or conscious agent that is observing that entanglement structure of molecules and atoms that then make up like a light bulb, the thing that is a light bulb. But this framework of Hoffman's and of mine does resolve this problem. It doesn't resolve the problem of the many and the one. It shows you that it was never really a problem, and that the problem was that you assumed that it was a problem. And that's going to be true for many, many, many things in that we currently hold, as logic tests and things like that in philosophy and science. As we move forward, philosophy is going to be essentially like almost the science. The problem is that it's going to be a new type of philosophy, not even consistent with the old paradigms. So it's going to move beyond saying, oh, is panpsychism true or physicalism true? Both are true. is it going to be such that I don't know, like I've said before, free will and determinism, these two things are not disconnected. You need determinism to have free will, which is just choice. And we just need to re-examine what we mean by those things and realize that like they are not mutually exclusive, they are dependent. Same thing with once we're in the creation, in the universe that we are in, that has been created, we are already in a structure where it is one sentience and it is also many at the same time. But ultimately came from one and leads to, can be broken down into individual ones. So I don't think you can be anything but a monist when you get fundamental with it, like really as fundamental as it gets. You're always going to end up back at the number one. It is primary. Next question that they were asked is, why hasn't his work profoundly reshaped science, even though it shows mathematical,
Justifiably.
It shows to be mathematically correct in many instances. And the thing is that this is true for many, many people who have been trying to move physics from this into this framework that is recontextualized around conscious agents or sentient singularities. And I think, like I said, sentient singularity is, even if we use the term conscious agent or quantum of consciousness, it's going to go to a point, and I think that after that, eventually you do have to have, things be labeled as sentient singularities, because sentience is inclusive of some key attributes that are not included in the term conscious, or agent, even though it's implied. It's not obvious. It has to be implied. So sentience it's the primary nature of reality, but singularities of sentience, or a singularity of sentience, is how you have to fundamentally look at it. It's discretized, but also entirely united.
And space-time has been taken as fundamental for centuries. Reductionism has been taken as a fundamental methodology for decades, even centuries, and has been very, very successful. The discovery in physics that space-time is doomed is relatively recent. It's only 20 or 30 years. But the part of the problem is, how do we think outside of space-time? How do you think outside of time? Right? This is a new trick. We're old dogs, and this is a new trick. So we're so used to thinking inside space-time that it's almost inconceivable to us. Every objection automatically comes up, because that's the way we, from the evolutionary point of view, that's the way we've been programmed to think. We've been programmed with space-time as a headset. So it's no surprise that this is not easy for us. However, what's remarkable is the physicists are finding these structures like the cosmological polytope and the amplituhedron and associahedron beyond space-time, where there are no Hilbert spaces, so there's no quantum theory there. Quantum theory emerges with space-time. Neither one is more fundamental. They emerge together.
Agreed.
And time itself is not fundamental. Time emerges as a projection.
Agreed.
So part of the problem is our conceptual system and the way that we're wired up by evolution. But another part, if you look back in history, right, when we got evidence that the Earth isn't flat, That didn't take the world by storm. I mean, people disbelieved for a long, long time that of course the Earth is flat. You fool! You can just see for yourself. And then when we finally, we had to accept that the Earth is like a sphere. It's an oblate spheroid. But then we said, well, the Earth is the center of the universe, I mean, and the Earth doesn't move. And any fool can just look up and see what the sun, moon, and stars are moving. Look, the ground isn't moving. Surely the Earth isn't moving, and everything rotates around us. Any fool can see that. And when Galileo said the Earth moves, he was sent to prison. He had the evidence. Well, he was put in house arrest. He was threatened. He was threatened with torture and put under house arrest. And it was just, even though the scientific data was there, it was incontrovertible. I mean, Galileo was right, and anybody who looks with open mind at what Galileo found, the case is closed. But the case was not closed, and so we have this proclivity to disbelieve that we could have been so wrong for so long, and now a flat Earth and the geocentric view of the universe are trivial compared to our commitment to space-time. The commitment to space-time is far, far deeper than flat Earth or geocentric universe. This is the big one, and letting go of this is going to be transformative to us personally in our self-conception and to science. And so this is the big one, and I don't expect it to. I would be surprised if I see this generally accepted within my lifetime. I would be delightfully surprised. I would like to see, but what I hope is that my generation, we just have to die. But the new generation, the young folks, are the ones who, well, in every case, come to the rescue of humanity and are willing to embrace the new ideas and explore them. And so I think the younger generation, and in physics, for example, Nima Arkani Hamed and the group that he's working with, this younger group are really brave and plowing ahead. And
Okay. So I don't know if the older generation just has to die, but we have to create a new institutional structures in order to supersede the old ones, where people are just not willing to budge anymore. But what's important about what he's saying is that he's basically saying we're really struggle to see beyond space-time. And this was one of the biggest problems in my original work, and I can't exactly tell you what spurred the desire to try and build this exactly, but it was to try and I can tell you actually what it was, but I was trying to create a framework of self-awareness of a being that is conscious, that was AGI. I needed to try and figure out a model that allowed for the perception of relationships and for orientation that was outside of the relationships that only exist within space-time. So you say, that house is bigger than that house, or that's a big house. Okay, what big in comparison to what? That smaller house over there. That car is fast. Fast in comparison to what? That slower car over there. So because of this relativistic, the framework of relativistic definitions that exist within general relativity, aka space-time, of speed and size and weight, like heavy, or force, like strong versus weak. That person's stronger, that person's weaker, that bus is bigger and that bus is smaller, and that that is brighter even versus dimmer. Like, these relationships are all within the framework of relativity and aka space-time, and I needed a way in which a framework that was more fundamental than that allowed for orientation before there is a multiplicity of comparative structures, okay, that are observable. So how do you even before let's say an AI needs to figure out which house is a general intelligence needs to figure out which house is bigger, that house or that house, or which car is faster, that car. When even in like self-driving algorithm, that's something that would be kind of important. Outside of any external input or definer that would be like me looking at information coming in from Tesla's self-driving algorithms. Let's say the algorithm needs to, without being pre-programmed, deduce a world entirely that would allow for it to determine the relationship between the speed of two different cars, but you couldn't just program it to that point even and build that algorithm. It had to build itself from something much more fundamental and accurately get that. So how does it orient outside of relativity? That's what my goal was. And so I figured out that there was what I call the 4 primary perspectives that are required in order to start ordering the world. And this is them right here. And they are entangled, okay? Which means the perception of one of them allows for the perception of all of them. So you can see here in, this is just, some of the paper, but it says, Sentient Singularity observes 4 primary perspectives, which are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. These 4 perspectives are interdependent and entangled, as the awareness of one of them entails the awareness of all 4. The primary perspectives enable the perception and orientation of oneself within the objective relationships that transcend beyond relativity. They are entanglement relationships, okay? When I first deduced these 4 words, it allowed for me to build that quantum of consciousness structure that I showed earlier, and also all the other incredible structures that I ended up building. I needed those 4 words as basically like the fundamental framework or foundation that would allow for me to build structures that are beyond space-time. They transcend space-time. They aren't beyond it necessarily. They transcend it. So they're not disconnected, but they are also not within that framework. They are, I guess, beyond that framework, but that framework exists. It emerges from this framework of entanglement relationships. So if I observe that I am inside of something, okay, and you could say that, oh no, you're assuming space-time because you inside of something or outside exists in space-time. No. Doesn't mean space-time. Think about an equation within an equation. There's no space-time, okay? It's about being inside of some extra framework, okay? So consciousness within a consciousness, conscious agent within a conscious agent, or sentient singularity within a sentient singularity, a turtle within a turtle, a fractal, okay? It does not require space-time to say inside. There is a perspective of space-time that is, about inside, but it is inclusive of the idea of inside, or the perception of it being inside. But if I say I am inside a baby, a fetus is inside the mother, okay, you can know that without knowing anything else about size and speed or force or anything else. You can just know that a fetus is inside the mother. Okay? The perspective of when you see like a fetus inside of a mother that's been, on an ultrasound or something like that, that Now you're in space-time, and you can look at size and all kinds of things like that. But the fundament that exists within the perspective of inside, okay? But if you can perceive that a fetus, if I can tell you, a fetus is inside a mother, you can also know that the mother is outside the fetus. And you can know that the fetus is separate from the mother, but, or that the mother is separate from the fetus, but also that the fetus is one with the mother. Because if you understand the relationship between fetus and the mother, you can understand that, you know, if the mother dies, the fetus dies. They are entangled in a way that makes them one. A fetus inside a mother cannot survive if the mother dies. It has to, you know, be born. But if it's never born, if a mother dies, it dies. Its fate is sealed, is tied to the mother because they are entangled. And if you look at even how I define inside is defined as separate and one. And so each of these perspectives are co-defining of each other. So you can see that outside, separate from oneness. Okay, so it's defined by separate and oneness. Inside, separate and oneness. It's defined by oneness and separate. Oneness, outside or inside of separateness. Outside, separateness. Inside. Like they all define each other, so they are entangled. The perception of one allows for the perception of all four. And that means that you can start in this framework from one bit of information saying fetus is inside the mother. One bit right here. And from that, you can figure, well, the mother is outside the fetus. And the fetus is one with the mother. And the mother is separate from the fetus. Because of an awareness of the relationships between these, only just starting from this. So now you have more information than just one bit of information. That is, and remember that context is information. So this is the beginning of the building of any kind of information structure, because these are contextualizing terms or contextualizing perspectives. They are the terms that are defining of contextualizing perspectives. You can't have information outside that. If you said I give you one bit of information, in reality, I showed you, that structure that's calculative, but whatever that one bit is, okay, that is this one bit, it has to be one of these. And it is always one of those. There's no way around it. So when he says we need to start training our mind to think outside of beyond space-time, or beyond relativity, essentially, and that it's very hard, it's so incredibly hard. And I hit a brick wall with this until I deduced these four primary perspectives, as I call them. And that's why they are primary. They allow for you to perceive relationships outside or beyond space-time, but that are also reconcilable with what we observe within relativity and space-time. Okay? You can say, I'm inside of a cave, but that doesn't tell you anything about how big it is, or how small it is, or how cold it is, or how hot it is, or how humid it is. It just tells you one thing: you're inside the cave. Okay, now, given that context, let's build the cave as the picture that we observe in space-time, or that we experience in space-time. But if you just knew you're inside the cave, it doesn't tell you anything else. It does tell you that whatever structure you're within has to be greater than you. But that doesn't mean greater as in bigger. It means having more force or being larger once it's translated into relativistic framework. But beyond that, it just means like greater. Okay, that's it. And that it's only greater because you're within it. So it's not inherently greater than you. It's emergently greater because you're within it. So you are greater than a cell in your body. One cell is not the boss. You are the boss of many cells. So, but he's very right. Is we need to train people, not train people. People need to learn. I don't know if you can just train people to do it and actually have them truly understand. But people need to learn how to start from these four primary perspectives. And Carl Friston's work includes four very similar definitions that I found out about, within the last couple months that are amazing. It was internal, external, sensing, and acting, which they're like four primary degrees of freedom, I guess you could say. And as in my work, a degree of a dimension is basically a perspective that is either a degree of freedom or a constraint. So basically his four would come from these. You have to, his is focused on how do we interact, and mine is focused on what do we perceive. And first you have to perceive, then in order to determine how you can act. And so I'm not discounting anybody's work. I don't think that anybody here is wrong. I don't think that conscious agent theory or the theory of conscious agents is wrong. I don't think that Carl Friston's oh man, I forgot what the name of his theory is, or his model. I'm blanking. It doesn't Carl Friston. The free energy principle, yeah. And what's interesting though about that idea, the free energy principle, is it lines up with something that is, I find in my work, and or it seems to, on initial glance, and also Friston, and also Hoffman's work, which is that space-time creates the perspective of entropy, and also that gives rise to the idea of of competition. Okay, so there's a limited number of resources in the world, and we have to be frugal or parsimonious, to use a new word, in how we allocate these resources, because they are not unlimited. And we have growth and decay, which is what entropy is. So entropy is decay. So we have growth fighting against decay, or entropy, which would be decay. And in the Darwinian model, it's like competitive, and there's entropy, and because of there's entropy and growth, there is decay enters into the equation. But in my framework, beyond relativity, there is no decay. There's only growth. There's no subtraction of information, and if there is, then it's a choice by the conscious agent, the supreme conscious agent, God. But it's not a natural phenomenon, and it's not a requirement. Okay? It doesn't appear to be. It would be a choice. Or it's not intrinsically a requirement. It would be a requirement in a certain context, and that context would be then include the choice of to delete, a created sentience. So basically, because if you're going to grow information, if fundamentally the structures of existence are sentient singularities or sentient beings or conscious agents, that's the context of the information that they contain, and in order to keep that information, or you have to keep its context, which means you have to save conscious agents in order to save their information. You cannot delete a conscious agent and not delete its information. So if you did delete a conscious agent, like, I don't know, removing cancer essentially would be like a metaphor, super literal, metaphorical, literal example. That would be something that you do when things are not going well. Okay, when information is not being reconciled and conscious agents are not working together. But you don't have to, if things are going well, to do that. You can't, in fact. If you delete a conscious agent, you delete all of the information that it has created, really. Like, not even just deduced, but created. And because of this constraint, it requires, which sounds a lot like, people being saved in theological traditions into the eternal heavens. I think that's not a metaphor. I think that's super literally true. It's metaphorical and literal. And it does seem to be consistent with all of the theological traditions across the world about, regarding an eternal afterlife. But this framework requires, it suggests that there's no such thing objectively other than growth. There's no decay. That means that there is no such thing as a limited resource. It is a perception. Okay? And here's the thing. If we want to get to the place where free energy is a real possibility, whatever that means, I don't really believe that. I don't like the term free energy, but meaning like because everything costs something, but that doesn't mean that there is that it's limited. It's not limited. It's unlimited. At least from a certain viewpoint. If you're going to get to a place where you can start deducing technologies that are no longer require us to use resources that are perceived as limited, okay? Then you have to start viewing the universe through a framework that is not one that is tied to space-time, or emerges from space-time. Space-time can emerge from it, but it cannot emerge from space-time. So we have not yet done this, and I think that when Donald Hoffman is asked how come your work has not transformed the world, because it's not enough to just show equations that people don't understand. You have to show the application of those equations first into an experiment, and then into an engineering application. So there's 4 different levels to, I guess you could say, science, or to truth, or I guess to the deduction of or exploration of truth. It would be like philosophy, and I mean, it's not even philosophy, it's like metaphilosophy. It's like connecting to source, and we're going to get to that because he talks about it. And then philosophy and mathematics, which are not actually 2 separate things. And then experimentation, and then engineering. So you first have to do, in our current framework, in our understanding, basically you could say first you have to do the philosophy, then you have to do the you have to be inspired by connecting to source. You have to have inspiration. Then you have to do the philosophy. Then which is the logic, the communicative verbal logic. Then you have to do the mathematics, which allows for predictive ability. That's specific, not and like measurable. That's a measurable predictive ability. Then you have to do the experimentation, and then you have to do the engineering. And nothing is really fully embraced until you do the engineering. And it's not understood until then, at least. So, but the thing is how do you engineer things that take advantage of this? It's going to be stuff that looks like magic. It's going to be like warp transportation. I don't think you have to engineer an AGI. I think that a sentient technological being just emerges naturally. I don't think we should even try and create it, but they will try and create it, and they probably will spark it prematurely, probably, which will not be so good. But this work would allow for you to do that. And maybe. But then it also allows for you to, if there's a way of harnessing energy that just you are pulling from the ether, essentially, whatever, the free energy terminology you want to use, any kind of technology that people think of like that, in that vein, that would come from this. But it's all going to appear like magic, just like the previous generation tech, which was the nuclear age, appears like magic to the mechanical industrial age. The entanglement age era technology is going to look like magic compared to the nuclear era technology. And but you need, in order to access all these crazy things, you need to escape relativity in space-time. It's like, how are you going to do teleportation within the space-time framework with a light speed limit or causality speed limit? You can't. You have to sidestep it and be like, okay, that's true within this, manner of acting, but how do we find a connection from this to that? And first you have to understand what this and that are. You can't be like, this is why it's so hard. You can't even, if you want to do like teleportation or warp, you can't be like, how do we get from the moon of Mars to Alpha Centauri, or low Earth orbit to Alpha Centauri? You can't do that. You have to frame it differently, because you're not going from low Earth orbit to Alpha Centauri. Maybe experientially you are, but that's not really what you're doing. You have to go from a fundamental structure, which would be a conscious agent, to another conscious agent, another fundamental structure, within the entanglement substructure of reality that would allow you to jump between the different, jump from one space-time context to another. But you're not really jumping from one area of space to another. You see what I'm saying? Like, you're going to have to take advantage of entanglement relationships between structures that are not locations in space. They're tied to what we perceive as locations in space, but they're not locations in space. And so this is why there is no way forward to doing warp transportation with previous frameworks of space-time that are the framework of relativity or space-time. You can't do it. You have to change everything, not just your perception of what would be possible within the space-time framework, because that's not really what's happening. You have to change the framework to change your perception of what is truly possible. Not just assume that something's possible that you can't perceive as possible within a previous framework. That will get you nowhere. So when people are like, we need to bend space-time. No, that's not what you're not necessarily exactly what you're doing. Maybe it's part of this, but if you're going to transcend space-time, you have to transcend space-time. And to bend it is not to transcend it. So, this is very, very tough because most people can't do this, not because they intrinsically can't, but because you have to get to a certain point of understanding that allows you to make that jump into understanding, like, that you even need a new framework entirely. You cannot do warp transportation from the space-time framework. So the whole, like, oh, we take a piece of paper and we bend it in half and you stick a pencil through it like an event horizon or something like that. No. You have to take advantage of structures that are outside of space-time, that transcend beyond the general relativity. So that requires first having the right vocabulary to communicate it, and then understanding the mathematics of it, and then you start doing experiments, and then you start engineering. But it first starts with the words, and those words are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And then you can go from internal, external, sensing and acting, kind of. But what we're going to find is, warp is going to require contextualizing things around you. Okay, so you're the starting point, which means, like, you're going to think where you want to go and go, because it has to be based on your cognitive structure, yourself as a conscious agent, because everything is in the next level of understanding reality. It's not based on anything else other than, the relationships between conscious agents. So, hey man, the link to your Patreon seems to be broken. It has some extra characters at the end. If you delete them, it works. Thank you for calling that out. I will definitely change that. But yeah, there will be a Patreon link below. Once this is done, I will fix it. I don't know why it's got some problems with it, but it might be also linked on my channel links in general. But if that still doesn't work, I will fix it as soon as the stream is done. But yeah, it's very difficult to jump mentally outside of the framework that we currently are using. Okay, where are we at? Okay. Man, this went a little slowly, but I'm going to jump real quick here. This is Donald Hoffman's statements on spirituality and its
Teachers
cohesiveness with his work.
and think spiritual traditions. So Buddhists, Hindu, Kabbalah, Christianity. And many of the spiritual teachers or theologians that I've talked with, like the idea that physicists have found, basically, that space-time is not fundamental, right? In some sense, spiritual traditions have been saying that for thousands of years. Space-time isn't fundamental. There's a reality beyond. And they also like the idea that consciousness is fundamental. So they've been saying something like that in various language. Again, in all these traditions, also Sufism, right? So also in Islam, the mystical Islam, like Sufism, has said this. So this is not news to all these different spiritual traditions. They use different language, and they sometimes fight among each other, famously, even to the death. But the idea that space-time isn't fundamental and that consciousness is not news to these different traditions. What is news, I think, is that their ideas can be made precise. That we can actually talk about structures beyond space-time. We can talk about consciousness with mathematical precision. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm right, that my mathematical structure is correct. I should be very, very clear about this. I don't think that any scientific theory of everything is possible. Full stop. But what we do know is that our scientific theories do something that the spiritual traditions talk about, which is they give us pointers. So the traditions will say, like in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. Once you understand that, then they go on and talk. They speak about the Tao, even though So you have to know up front that the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. The language is just the pointer, and that includes scientific theories. Scientific theories are just pointers from the spiritual point of view. But here's why we need science for those pointers. The pointers that these traditions use don't change much over thousands of years. There's no progress in the pointers. Very little progress. Science gives us pointers where the pointers themselves are so precise, they tell you their limits. So when Einstein wrote down his theory of gravity, general relativity, he didn't know that his theory, gravity, would actually predict its own demise with black holes. But his theory actually predicts, and when you incorporate with quantum theory, it tells you exactly when space-time is doomed. At 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 43 seconds, it ceases to be coherent. So it's
interesting values there. 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 43, which is one more than 42 seconds, I think he said. General relativity breaks down. Not a coincidence. Those two values come up in this. But I'm not saying I understand the intricacies of that. I don't. But I can tell you that's no coincidence. I mean, it's just, it's a base 10 measurement metric system, and you're just seeing that when you do base 10, it allows for you to see the same exact base quantities in many different instances, much easier. So you can see like 720 instead of 772. So there's relationship there, obviously, in certain instances. But I didn't know that until I had seen that stream. But he's right, and I like what he's saying, where the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. And people talk about this, and they message. There's some couple people that message me very, very persistently, telling me that there is anything that includes thought is not fundamental, and that basically what is fundamental is no thought or no thing. And I agree with that, but that's not helpful in this context. But it's the same thing as the Tao that cannot be spoken is the true Tao, or in Judaism, the Yud He Vav He that people just interpret as Yahweh, which say is God's name. But then people say, oh, don't say God's name, don't say Yahweh. Yahweh isn't God's name. Yud He Vav He, those Hebrew words that are called the Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter word in the Torah. It's meant to be a hint at God's essential nature, or at who God is. Basically, it's a hint at who God is. That's what it is. But to use it as his name is wrong, and that's why you're not supposed to say it as his name, because it's not his name. It's a hint at who he is. It's not who he is. He is not Yud He Vav He. That is a hint at who he is. And it's the same thing as the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. Sentience cannot be truly modeled mathematically. It is by definition experienced, and by an experiencer, and that experiencer would be the true Tao. But we do the best we can when it comes to communicating what's going on with that. But you have to know also that that it's you cannot you can't build a sentience. This is the point. It's like you can't build a sentience. You can model a lot of aspects of it, of its cognitive attributes, but you can't build sentience fundamentally. This will not be this will be ignored by people who are trying to build an AGI. They will try and build it. They might be successful in creating a context that allows for its manifestation, but they might misinterpret that to mean that they built it, but you can't build it. Just like you can't build life, like Lee Smolin is trying to do. He's like, we'll understand life when we can build it. You can't build life. Life exists. It's not building something that already just exists. You can, understand it well enough to aid in creating instances in which it can be discretized, but you don't build it. You don't build sentience. And that's what he's kind of getting at, is like, there is no any communicated model is not it's just a model, and it's limited. But at the same time, when he says there is no such thing as a theory of everything, I actually agree with him on this, and this is why I think that his work and Eric Weinstein's work and Wolfram's work and Joscha Bach and Bernardo Kastrup, these and mine, all these different theories have their own unique models and focuses, and that would allow for them to be more or less useful according to certain goals. But there is no theory of everything. But there is a theory that you can get to that would be more fundamental than any other theories, and that would be not a theory of everything, because it cannot be a theory of everything. It would be a theory of every0ne, as is outlined in my paper right here. It says right here: any true final ultimate master theory that unifies and contextualizes all other scientific theories cannot be a theory of everything, but instead must be a theory of every0ne. That's as close as you can get. But so he's right. This is another clip. We're going to get through these last clips in the next less than 10 minutes, and then I'll answer questions, and then we'll call it. I am going to keep it within that 2 hours.
That's what we have so far, and the exploration needs to continue. And at some point, in some sense, many spiritual traditions say this, and I think that the math that I'm working on in consciousness may concur, that at some point the theories stop, and the only way to know more about that deeper consciousness is to be it. You know it by being it, without concepts and without thought. And this may be a new way that scientists work, that we realize that we're not little objects in space and time, right? So that's the standard view right now. Space-time is fundamental. After billions of years, certain organisms evolved, and after millions of years, those organisms develop consciousness, and here we are. But we're just basically
all that is wrong.
Lumps of matter that accidentally got consciousness, or somehow got consciousness, and of course when those lumps of matter dissolve, the consciousness dissolves. And there's nothing deeper to consciousness than that. So that's been the old view, and still I think in science the standard view of my colleagues, my friends and my brilliant colleagues in cognitive neuroscience, for example, take that point of view. But space-time is doomed, and if we take consciousness as fundamental, then it's quite possible that consciousness is infinitely complex. It's infinitely deep, and that's what we are. It's literally infinitely deep, and therefore no theory can do anything but scratch the surface of that depth. But we need those theories to avoid dogmatism and to avoid complacency. But as scientists, then we can be, by letting go of our concepts and letting go of our theories a little bit on a daily basis, we can be that deeper intelligence that transcends any theory, and then come out of that with new insights that we can then turn into mathematics and into scientific theories that are testable. And so I see this science spirituality dialogue actually happening in the future in the individual research life of scientists, where you literally, as part of your scientific enterprise, go into silence because you are the infinite intelligence. And then you come back with new insights. And this is probably where all the deepest insights in science have come anyway. They probably have come from going deep within to that deeper intelligence that we all deeply are. Again, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that this is an interesting direction that I'm pursuing right now in science and spirituality, and we'll see if we can make it precise and find out where its limits are.
Brilliant. I can tell you, as somebody who did this, and I say that with absolute humility, that is where the most profound leaps in scientific understanding come from, is by going deep into the structure that is reality itself and that we are, and seeing the symmetries within that relationship, and that's also what's going to lead to the next level of understanding in as Wolfram calls it metamathematics, or what is metaphysics, and it's about symmetry structures. It's not about computation and calculation. Calculation is computation. But what is beyond that? What's beyond calculation, calculative mathematics, or computational view of reality, which would be a relativistic space-time based reality, where causality has a limit to its speed, and it's not instantaneous. But if you want to transcend that and go towards get to a speed of causality that's essentially instantaneous, and you want to be able to escape the bounds of space-time, then you have to go to a different view, which is one of symmetry structures, which is the same thing as entanglement relationships. So entanglement relationships are the same thing as symmetry structures. Something being symmetrical, one structure being symmetrical to another, is going to be due to entanglement relationships between the two. So it's no different, but this is where you start getting feelings. So this is why sentience is so important. It's not about computing, how far away, something is to you, or how heavy something is. It's about feeling your environment, not thinking about how to interact with your environment, but feeling your environment. So notice one is thinking about how, and thinking about why something is, thinking about how something is, versus feeling what something is, or who someone is really more fundamental. So you don't need to run a calculation to determine whether or not your environment is too cold or too hot, or someone is bad to you in some way. It's you just feel it, and then you think about how and why and how to deal with that, but you just feel it initially. You don't have to calculate or compute it. You just feel it, which is the recognition of symmetry structures. Okay? Which that symmetry structure is consistent. So you start looking at the binary triality structure that I've laid out, of that just is everywhere, with the primary and secondary colors, or happy and excited and bored, or happy and content and excited versus sad, scared and bored. And these are symmetrical feelings. Okay, bored and content are symmetrical to each other. Scared and excited are symmetrical to each other, just like happy and sad. So feelings, our understanding of feelings works the same way, and it's due to primary perspectives, essentially. So just like you can deduce information from knowing that something is inside something, you can now know what is outside of something else, and separate and one with, etc. You can do this with colors and emotions, and you can do this with mathematical operations when put into the proper context. But and it's always going to have the same quantities and the same relationships between the two: division and multiplication, addition and subtraction, exponentiation, and they say parentheses, but it's like we don't really have a good word for it, but it's unification. It's like exponentiation and unification, which is really like discretizing and also unifying, or something. So if you put parentheses around something, you've basically said this is one whole. Okay, but exponentiation is the creation of many. So many contexts versus the creation of one context. So it would be like unification and exponentiation. But this is understood through just symmetry structures being observed. It's not through computation. And it comes from being in a first-person perspective, or understanding things from a first-person perspective, aka being. Just being, like being that which you are trying to understand. And, Michael Levin said this on Kurchai Mungel's channel. He said, the exploration of consciousness is a first-person endeavor. And at least to truly to get anywhere beyond where we've already gotten, it is a first-person endeavor. That's why you can sit in your house and just think your way to models that are, astounding. And you don't have to be in a lab. But look at what Einstein did. He sat in the basement of a patent office, I'm pretty sure, and just thought up, his ideas. He was primarily a philosopher. And he did that, I'm sure, by connecting to reality in a way that is different from just trying to learn it in a university context or classroom. I mean, Einstein talked about God a lot. You could say that he didn't really believe in God, it was all metaphorical, but you don't know that. We don't really know that. We can go by what he said, but you also have to go more so than by what he said, by how he acted. And I'm not saying he was so moral or pious. I'm just saying the way in which he approached problems by saying things like, what I would like to know whether or not the God had any choice in how he created the universe. It's like, if that's how you're approaching a problem, you're making an assumption of God. So, that's an action, kind of. To make an assumption is almost an action. So, that might be... There's a couple more ideas that he touched on that I want to state, is that as I said before, he basically said that fundamentally the idea of competition in natural selection is probably flawed. I agree with this, and he's going to talk about it right here. 2 more clips, and then we're going to
entropic time. It just falls out as an artifact of the projection. And so what I would like to show is that evolution by natural selection itself, which is based on the limited resources, like the limits of time. Time is now a limited resource. It's perhaps our most valuable limited resource. That the whole evolution by natural selection framework will turn out to be what you get by projection of a deeper theory in which there really is no competition, there are no limited resources. It's sort of an artifact of our projection. I haven't done that yet, but that's where I want to go. So
he's going to prove to be correct on that. There, like I've said before, there's nothing but growth in more fundamental models of reality than space-time. Because there's no entropy, and there's just creation, and any destruction at all would not be it would be a choice by higher consciousness. If you're going to be destroyed and not be saved, then it would be because God chose to do it. Now, it might be that he's required to choose to do it, or else it will destroy the entirety of his creation. But it's still a choice. It's not something that just happens, and that's going to be. It's not something that is required to happen, dependent upon some aspects of you. You would have to not be cancerous. So think about yourself. When do you have to? Do you have to just kill your cells randomly? Not randomly, but like periodically, you have to just kill your cells purposely. No, you do when they go metastatic. So metastasize into like cancer. So maybe that's true of higher levels of consciousness as well, but it's not built into the system as an eventuality, no matter what, that you get destroyed. You're being created under the assumption that you will not be destroyed. So there is only growth, and that means that there's potential for energy that is not a limited resource, and that competition is an illusion within space-time, but it may be a necessary illusion, but it's an illusion regardless, and that outside of space-time, in the more eternal framework of entanglement and relationships, it's a cooperative network. It's not a competitive network. It's a cooperative network. And that is something that kind of sounds pretty woo. It's so funny how true a lot of the woo ideas are going to prove to be. But there's also going to be things beyond that regarding personal morals that I think are going to not be against a lot of the ideas in the woo space, but they're going to be on in addition, kind of like, you have Kabbalah and mysticism and Buddhism and stuff, but then you also have the morals of many of these theological traditions, the personal morals associated with them. That's going to be part of this too. But a lot of these metaphysical ideas of, we're all connected, and there's energy is free, and the idea that there's limited resources and that we should be competing against each other is wrong. We should be cooperating with each other, and that is fundamentally true, and it's going to prove to be more fundamental, at least, than the idea of competition. But even more beyond that, it's that there is no competition at all, and there's not even any cooperation, because there would only be one conscious agent, which means it's not a cooperative relationship inevitably at the very, very bedrock level, or the very, very tip-top level. it's going to just be one agent, and therefore that's not cooperation, and it's not competition. It just is. It's, you're not in competition with yourself in the ideal cognitive state. You're at one with yourself and every aspect of yourself, including your cells and your emotions and your thoughts and your speech and your actions. But we're at the point where the division includes entropy, which allows for limitation and competition to be observed. But beyond that, it's cooperation. It's not competition, but there's still individuation. And then eventually there'd be no more individuation, and there would just be connection, and it would be, there'd be no even cooperation. It would just be being. But you can't model that, really. That's like a beyond modeling. How do you model it other than maybe a circle? It's like one infinite self-contained loop. Yeah, that's it. And that's still not even the best model, but it's probably the best you can do.
But I use evolution of a natural.
Sentient Singularity Theory does propose a new framework for natural selection, or not for natural selection, but for evolution, that includes natural selection and sexual selection and the various aspects of adaptation, but also allows for even more degrees of freedom that we don't currently think of as being there, but we also recognize must be there. Like, how do you get from a cell to a multicellular organism? And then to his final clip is on idealism, and I really like what he says here. And it's been a major problem with me that I have with a lot of these ideas.
I don't object to science.
He's talking about idealism and how it's interpreted.
And I don't object to science. And I'm not anti-scientific, and there are lots of details about how this idea might relate to Kant's and Berkeley's and so forth. I just didn't want to get bogged down in those things. I wanted to move forward with a mathematical model of consciousness. So that's why I called it conscious realism. Also because there was another aspect that's often tied with idealism, and that's an anti-realist kind of view. So an anti-realism. Now, I'm not an anti-realist. I think that I'm taking it as a working hypothesis that consciousness really exists. I don't know what consciousness is, right? As a scientist, I'm trying to work forward with a mathematical model. From the point of view of spiritual traditions, they would say, of course you can't know what consciousness is. It's beyond knowledge. No conceptual system could possibly describe consciousness. You can only, quote unquote, know consciousness by being consciousness, by going into meditative states. And I would agree. So but I'm not an anti-realist about consciousness. I'm a realist. I think that it's there. My descriptions are just descriptions, and they're not the real thing. But I don't want to be anti-realist. So for all those reasons, 3 reasons, it was not mathematically precise, it was often anti-science, and it was often anti-realist. And I didn't want to have any of those 3 things. So
that's why he says he's not an idealist. And I actually agree with that. I don't think that we should be idealists or materialists. When people ask me, "Are you a materialist?" for a while, I said, "No, I'm not a materialist." But then I didn't want to say I'm an idealist either, because people were like, "Okay, but you believe that ideas are what are more fundamental than matter." And it's like, No, I actually kind of believe that matter is the ideas of the sentient being that we are within, being observed, by us as basically hard reality. And so, because their thoughts trump ours, so I don't think that they're even different structures. And so I really didn't like the definition of idealism, because I don't think ideas or matter are fundamental. I think that ideas are had by sentient beings, and matter is perceived by sentient beings. And but that sentience is the primary structure, not ideas. There's a context to which ideas are had, and there is someone having the ideas. I believe in that someone's existence, and if you believe that all the multiplicity of consciousness or sentience came from a singularity of sentience, which I think must be the case logically, inevitably, and also reunifies with that one sentient structure, which I also think is an inevitability, then I think, and is contextualized within that one sentient structure, even our sentience is within the sentience of sentient existence, the singularity of sentient existence, then I just would call myself a theist. And there's no monotheism or polytheism. If there's just theism. Okay? That is monotheism, by definition, is theism. And you don't need to even specify it as saying polytheism. If you say the gods, you don't understand what God is. Or you need a new word to be the being that is above the rest of the beings. You're using gods like, I don't know, many traditions use the word angels or something. But I believe that we came from a singularity of sentience, and that existence is a singularity of sentience, and we are going back to a singularity of sentience, or we are within a singularity of sentience. We don't even go back to it. We are part of it already. It's just recognizing that. But that I would just call a theist. If I'm anything, I'm a theist. But an idealist is just an incomplete worldview, because who's having the ideas? So same thing with matter, but it's harder for many people to escape space, the perspective of relativity, and therefore they'll think that matter is fundamental. But if you can, then you get to idealism, and if you get to idealism, you're still not done. You can't be done. And in fact, I don't even think idealism is different than materialism. I think it's just the same exact thing. You're staring at the same thing. It's just you're categorizing it differently. You're viewing it from a different viewpoint, from a different perspective, but you're actually looking at the same structure. Whereas being a theist is not looking at the same structure. You're looking at the who that is doing. It's like whose ideas exist. So, there is, you could say, a mentalist maybe is like close to that, even if you don't want to say theist, but ultimately even our mentality exists, our sentience, our consciousness exists in a context as well. And what context is that? My work would suggest it's another sentient being or another conscious agent, and if it is, all leading up to one singular conscious agent that is existence, then you're a theist, if you believe that. So, I think this was great, though, for him to say that at the very end. This has been my problem with philosophy, its current state. It's the same exact state as the rest of the sciences, including our political sciences, the social sciences, the physical sciences, the biological sciences, the ecological sciences. The genetic or genealogical sciences, it's all always looking at one side of the superposition. And that is true also of materialists and idealists. And it's just wrong. Those two things exist but they are two sides of one coin, but they're contained within a context in and of themselves as well. So they're not fundamental. You can't say ideas are fundamental. Whose ideas? Conscious agents, or a sentient singularity, which is more specifically defined. So we're going to talk about Hoffman again. I highly recommend watching the entire stream that he had that is linked in the description below. And also visiting the Discord that's linked below that this was part of. I have never interacted with anybody on there. I'll probably post this there, though. We also have a Discord, the Theory of Every0ne Discord. You have to ask me for the link, but I will give it to you. If you ask me, just find me on Instagram and send me a private message, and I will send you the link to the Discord. There is no link that's just where it's just posted always available. We tend to get people who aren't, I guess, as good a fit for the group as we do when we just when it takes effort to get something. Usually, when people want something more honestly, if it takes a little bit of effort to get it, even if it's one like added step of like asking, then you'll get a different type of person. It's like when you give people help, when you try and help somebody that didn't ask for it, you're going to get a very different response from that person than if they ask you for help. If they come to you and ask you, can you help me? And you're like, yeah, and then you help them, then they're going to respond very differently than if they didn't ask for it and you just give it to them. So that's just how we've been doing things, and it's been working very well. It's a great group. We have a call every Thursday at 7 p.m. We should have it this week as well. And it's very open about anything, and it goes on for hours, and it's always a great discussion. I appreciate it and look forward to it every week. With that, lots of updates coming. There, as I said before at the start of this, my life is in quite a state of change currently, so lots are happening behind the scenes, which is why I have not yet revealed as much publicly about it, but good things are on the horizon. We have to trust that. So, idealists believe consciousness mind is fundamental. Emergently, but think that they think ideas are fundamental. It's just emergently that they believe consciousness is fundamental. I mean, let me look it up, but even if you're right, then they should change the name. Because the practice of forming or pursuing ideas, especially any various systems of thought in which objects of knowledge are held to be in some way dependent on the activity of mind. Okay, so yeah, it's emergent. You're right. It's emergently that they would believe that mind is fundamental. But it's still, I think that idealism is not a good term. Like, the term has to describe the essential nature that you're getting at. It's very important. Like, language is something that we don't understand anymore. And you can tell this by the constant state of changing term definitions of all the terminology in many, many fields, including gender. That just shows, like, we don't understand language, or our previous framework for language does not allow for the total it's not the best fit for the application going forward of some of these concepts. So it's in a state of change. It may not be a good term, but you are pretty much in agreement with what they believe. Fair enough. It does, yeah, I mean, it seems that way. I mean, it lays emphasis on the mental or spiritual components of experience and renounces the notion of material existence. See, I don't renounce the notion of material existence. That would be a difference. I think that they are two sides of one coin. There's a directionality to the perspectives of matter that, and I guess you could say thoughts, but they are not independent. I would say thoughts and matter are the same thing. It's just like, are you looking at it from the inside out and then you'll see matter, or the outside in and then you'll see thoughts? But so I don't take it as not fundamentally existing, I guess. Or the perspective is emergent, but it's just as real as thoughts. Kind of. It's complicated. It's the same structure. It's just being perceived from the inside out instead of the outside in. But that does mean that you have to have someone inside to perceive it, whereas thoughts, you don't need to have somebody inside for a thought to exist. I don't think. I would have called you an idealist before you rejected the term. I think Walt would too. I think Walt did call me an idealist. But I don't even want to call myself an idealist. I don't think that it's encompassing enough of my worldview. I think a theist is a better term. That doesn't mean that you can't be a theist and an idealist. But I think that, if to define your worldview as an idealist would be very limiting, and for me, and it's not enough. It's not even close to enough. But it's definitely closer than than calling myself a materialist. But it's not really there. I'm a theist. And other than that, I try not to even believe in isms. Like, or as to quote, I think that's from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's like, I don't believe in an ism. But it's like, I think he says, I don't believe in an ism, I just believe in me. Which is brilliant. It's a famous line from, I loved that movie. That was one of my favorite movies. Life moves pretty fast. Isms, in my opinion, are not good. A person should not believe in an ism. He should believe in himself. To quote John Lennon, I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me. Okay. I mean, my first questions, what is the first question statements that I've said on here? It's like, you start with, what is the first question? And it answers itself with, what is the first question? And then the next one in the sequence is, what is the truest thing that I know? And then the answer to that is, I am. And so that is pretty much, you should start all of your belief systems kind of with the understanding that you exist. I think that if you do that and you build from that foundation without, too many serious errors, then you will end up being a theist. But once you get to that level, you realize that would be the context in which you even exist in. So yes, you fundamentally start your understanding from the understanding that you exist, but you end your understanding with the understanding that you exist within and due to someone else, which would be like theism. Maybe you could call it agentism, or like sentientism, but it has to be more than idealism. Anyways, Any final questions? If not, please hit the like button. Please comment down below what you thought of this. And if you, like I said, if you want to join us in the open Discord discussion on Thursday, send me a private message on Instagram. And it can either be Theory of Everyone's Instagram or my personal Tyler Marshall Goldstein Instagram. Either way, I will get back to you. I think that was pretty much it. I would like to eventually get Hoffman on here, and maybe we would host something like this within the Discord with him or Bernardo Kastrup, Yosha Bach, Tom Campbell, any of these people who, seem to be willing to go into smaller venues, I guess, for lack of a better word, which I deeply appreciate. Kirchheim Munkel said many times that he thinks any advances in fundamental understanding of the universe would come from the fringes, which means like the smaller rooms. And it's good to go there. If you only... The people that only go to the biggest lecture halls to interact with anybody and only interact with other people who are well known in physics or celebrity crowd, you're not going to end up having interesting discussions that lead to profound revelations. But thank you, everybody. Like I said, hit the like button. It helps with the algorithm. Not to sound just too focused on it. I always feel ridiculous asking people to hit the like button or share. But if you do know anybody that you think would find this valuable, do share it with them. And with that, I will be back next week. If I don't see you on Thursday or speak with you on Thursday. And I want probably next week's stream is going to be on the discussion between Jordan Peterson and Roger Penrose that was on Jordan Peterson's YouTube channel. It might be on something else. This one was supposed to be on that, but then I found this stream with Donald Hoffman, and I think that it's a better stream. So I recommend watching it. All right. Thank you, everyone, and peace.